This episode may contain content that is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised, especially for those under the age of 13. Welcome to Into the Night. I'm Nari, your guide on today's excursion down a twisted path. Be careful not to get lost. Be it dark or light, it's easy to lose your way. Are you ready? Then let's begin. Magashanna. The room fell silent. Considering what happened to the hazmat team, I don't think anyone could have spoken. If it wasn't for the twitch in the hand of the dead man, it would appear as if nothing had happened at all. And yet, one by one, they collapsed onto the hewn stone floors, writhing there until death finally took them. I remember personally cleaning and sealing a few of those suits. They were supposedly completely sealed, protected from threats ranging from viral agents to ionizing radiation, and we ourselves were locked in hermetically sealed by mechanical locks behind keycard access, which only made the truth of their deaths all the more mystifying. What could have both stirred the dead and killed my colleagues? How to explain the convulsions, the desperate attempt at escape, the oozing, deep, ruby red blood spilling from 1,000 microscopic pricks? I am ashamed to admit that when it happened, I froze. We both did. But I was supposed to be on shift for observations and recordings. I instead traded the shift with Oscar, and now Oscar and Henry and Lou and Garrett were all lying on the floor in some godforsaken crypt with a corpse from a different millennium. I may as well have joined them for how paralyzed I was in the observation room. The old CRT monitors were deathly silent, still depicting the gruesome scene in that coldly sterile manner that only a machine can. Silent enough that I could hear my breath quiver at the pounding of my heart. Silent enough that I could hear my sole companion, Dr. Key, whispering her way through some prayer I couldn't recognize. Silent enough that I could swear I heard the blood trickling down the steps towards the glass sarcophagus where the body lay. I always thought they were supposed to hum. I was a touch transfixed by the flow of blood after a time. I blame it on the lack of stimulus at the time of writing, but in the moment, I cannot be certain. It filled the grooves in the floor and trickled and dripped with all the urgency of fungal decay, torpidly making its way down toward the sarcophagus, which sat in the center of the burial chamber at its lowest point. At first, I could barely even watch, but as time passed, the disgust waned and my morbid curiosity waxed. The mummy itself was an undeniable oddity. From initial analysis, we were able to find preserved blood vessels and organs from the X-ray, but also blood. Fresh blood. We were able to determine the man entombed here had AB positive blood, judging from the small sample we had extracted from him. His hair was still oily, and even his eyelashes and beard hairs were still in place. If it weren't for the discoloration of his skin from the mummification process, I could swear he could get up out of his crypt and tell us exactly what we were looking for. Even his pose felt too lifelike to be completely sure he was dead. Rather than the crossed arms of Egyptian mummies, he was laying on his back, hands by his side, as if he had simply drifted off to sleep. Save the one that had inexplicably twitched upward from the wrist. The plaque at his feet read, in that old cuneiform, "Behold, Lugal Magashanna, King of Kirag, and devote yourself." The only disruption on his form was that hand that had suddenly twitched up. Lugal Mageshanna was an enigmatic figure. There were scant few references to him from other Mesopotamian states, and those who did refer to him did so in forbidding tones. From what we knew within the research team, he was a tyrant and superstitious, even for his time. In the temple capital of Kirag, he led his priests in occult rituals, though the supposed purpose of these rituals was lost to time. We do know, however, that everything he did was in service to his patron deity, Alwepthes. While other Sumerian gods like Marduk or Shamash or Inanna were very well documented, Alwepthes seemed to have been struck from any sort of record. We dreaded learning what these rituals may have entailed, and considering the responses from the neighbors of Kirag, we were right to do so. The city of Kirag was completely lost to time as well, so attaining first-person perspectives of the rituals proved to be rather difficult. Other cities only ever seemed to mention Kirag suddenly disappearing in the middle of the night, spinning tall tales about the hand of Alwepthes stretching down and taking Kirag into the heavens. If it weren't for a few scant artifacts found where Kirag was said to be, it would have been written off as a fairy tale. There was one larger tablet recovered, but unfortunately it was lost during the Iraqi invasion of the Gaza Strip in the early 90s. Our patron, Dr. Jordan Emmerich, had a researcher studying the tablet in secret, and unfortunately, he passed during the invasion. Whatever secrets he learned were lost to time, and the city remained a strange reminder of a more superstitious time. Even stranger, however, were the jars kept here with him. Mesopotamian burial traditions hardly included mummification. Grave goods would have been expected with someone of his kingly status, but the jars were an anomaly. Standing there against the wall, spaced out evenly, were large jars standing up to about my waist, and each of the jars was filled with fresh human blood, also typed to be AB positive. It was a true mystery how the blood, at the very least, hadn't coagulated. Perhaps there had been waiting the secrets of preservation that could keep this nearly 5,000-year-old blood so fluid and fresh that a new medical breakthrough was merely lying dormant, waiting to be discovered under the greenery just off the banks of the Euphrates. My mind briefly entertained the thought of that blood being freshly taken from some poor unfortunate soul who wandered in before us somehow, but that was quickly pushed away in favor of reason. The entrance had been sealed when we found it, the doors wrapped tight in some kind of animal sinew. Whoever last left this tomb had intended it to stay closed, and for nearly 5,000 years, the world had agreed. While I was left to my thought, Dr. Key spoke to me.
"What do we do now, Robert?"
she said. The sudden call nearly split me out of my skin.
"What happened in there?"
"We can't go in," I started. "We need to make a call and get reinforced, resupplied." Her eyes widened incredulously.
"We can't just wait in here."
Her voice was vehement, but her body was barely able to hold upright between the weakness in her knees. I knew she was coming down off the shock just as much as I was. I couldn't blame her. "As opposed to what, Ruth? Do we just go in there and die too?"
"At least we'd be doing something other than just waiting to be saved."
Dr. Emmerich is not going to waste all this funding. I'm just going to send him a message and tell him what happened. It won't take any time at all.
Dr. Emmerich is in America. What can he possibly do to help us?
I couldn't answer her. We were alone down here. No help, no hope. We sat in silent rumination. I looked out to the bodies slowly draining on the ground. We had to get to them somehow. There was still a spare hazmat suit, but what good would that do? I kept thinking and thinking and thinking, watching the blood still inexorably flow down to the center of the chamber. I watched it and started considering the ramifications. In most situations, the blood surely would have stopped by now. It would have found a natural settling point and started pooling. But there was something else at work, clearly. Each of the three men had a stream of blood pulling away from them and towards the glass sarcophagus. I was transfixed, distracted for the moment in consideration of the physics involved. It seemed to me that the blood ought to have simply pooled around the bodies or merely filled some grooves and likewise settled, and yet here it flowed, downward and downward on the old corpse. I looked back over the mummy, and what I saw chilled my very soul. The hand had moved again. Where it had simply lifted and remained pronate before, the hand was now supine, 2 fingers raised, palm towards the ceiling. I turned back to Dr. Key, and my face must have said it all, for she simply joined me and observed the hand. We went back over the monitors and watched the video back, fast-forwarding from the time of the killings. What I saw there in that recording, I simply could not explain. At a glacial pace, the hand that had twitched had, over the course of an hour, slowly rotated into that position. As inexplicable as the initial movement was, my mind boggled further at this development. Perhaps the inexplicable preservation of the body was to blame. Yes, that had to be it. The movement of suspended water via osmosis. Surely the body itself hadn't moved. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Dr. Key, however, was even more determined to leave now. She started suiting up in another hazmat suit, muttering the same prayer from before as she worked. I couldn't blame her. There was a rational explanation, surely, but fear was getting the better of us. I couldn't let her leave, of course. There was some unknown menace out there still. Perhaps some kind of trap we simply hadn't seen until now. I grabbed her shoulder and pulled her close. "Ruth, you can't leave," I said. "We have no idea what's going on out there. You're going to get yourself killed." She tore my hand off her. "Better I die trying for freedom than curled up in here waiting." She continued donning her suit. "You can stay down here all you like, but I'm getting the hell out of here." "Doctor, you aren't thinking right," I shouted, blocking the exit. "You've got your whole life ahead of you. We're waiting for help to come to us first. Dr. Emmerich will save us. Don't throw your life away." Ruth was clearly more determined than I was, however. She pulled me away from the door, but I held her tight, her back against my chest. We struggled and fought with each other for a moment before she overpowered me. She slammed my head against the wall. My whole world spun around me, and my eyes filled with stars. I collapsed to the floor, dazed and bewildered. When I was finally able to gather myself, she was already outside and on the radio. "Robert, I promise I'm going to come back for you," she said, her breath ragged from the fight. "But right now, I have to get out of here." I tried to get back out there with her, hazmat be damned, but she blocked the door from the outside. I slammed my fist on the door and screamed her name. I begged and pleaded with her not to go, but I could hear her footsteps growing softer. I turned back around to the window to watch her progress. She moved slow and deliberately, still wary of whatever danger rested here in the crypt. Step by step, inch by inch, she made her way toward the channel, leading upwards and outwards to the surface. I listened to her breath grow ever louder and fearful as she continued. She was by the other bodies at this point, no worse for the experience. I thought perhaps the danger had passed, that she had a window of opportunity. That was until I caught some motion out of the corner of my eye. The mummy's head slowly turned towards me. I watched it turn in real time, slowly and methodically. His face was indifferent, his eyes now open. We stared at each other for what felt like minutes, but couldn't have been more than seconds. And then the lights exploded. Every bulb, every monitor, every perceivable source of light all burst in an instant. Sparks flew for a few seconds, giving the last moments of light in what was assuredly the end of my life. I heard Ruth scream through the glass. The radio feed was completely silent. I dared not utter a sound, nor make a single movement. Dr. Key as well stopped from the sounds of things. Complete and total silence for the first time I could remember. Not even the sigh of ventilation. I could hear my heart pounding, my hands rubbing. I swear, even my sweat beading on my forehead. My mind raced with possibilities. The phenomenon surely came back, and now Ruth was bleeding out on the floor. I had nothing, not even the beginnings of a plan. I knew I had to get out, but how? I could tackle the door and hopefully dislodge whatever Dr. Key had put in place to lock the door. Would that even be possible? Was I simply stuck here for the rest of my days, however limited they may be? I could feel the tears beginning to well in my eyes, my throat closing, my chest hollowing. Eventually, however, the silence was broken.
Robert?
Said Ruth. I'm still here, Doctor. I responded, the relief nearly pulled a laugh out of me.
Thank God. Do you have any idea what happened?
It had to have been whatever killed the others. I saw them, and then came a scraping. The sound started, and I was unsure of what I was hearing until the crash of broken glass destroyed the new piece in the tomb. It had to have been the sarcophagus. There was nothing else in there that could have made such a sound. We both fell completely silent as a new sound emerged. A footstep. Singular. After a few moments, another came. I could hear the panic in Dr. Key's breath over the radio. She was trying her best to be silent, but the terror in her heart and the anxiety in her head kept her breaths trembling and frail. The footsteps continued. I was having a hard time tracking where they were headed until I heard the curious sound of moving fluid.
Ruth, what the hell is going on out there?
I whispered as quietly as I could into the receiver.
The mummy is moving,
Dr. Key said, doing her level best to stay calm.
The fucking mummy is alive and moving, Robert.
What do you mean, the mummy is alive? I nearly shouted, but I caught my voice before it could get too loud.
The mummy is alive and it's doing something with the blood.
She was breathless and still. She stood there silently before attempting to speak.
I'm coming back to you.
Don't you fucking dare, I responded. Stay still and try not to make any noise. You are in serious danger. She ignored me. I heard her footsteps start up. I tried to find some corner to hide in. Slowly, she made her way over to the door, and slowly I heard whatever she had put in front of the door move, calling out in a distant stone-on-stone scrape. Was it one of the jars? I could hardly believe what she had done. I kept in my little corner, praying for safety, when I heard the footsteps start again. I had to act fast. I kept quiet, inching to the radio before I could speak to her. Move, Ruth, I shouted in silence. He fucking hears you. She didn't respond verbally. She just started moving too. Her footsteps were as silent as she could make them, but the mummies were loud enough to track. Tap, 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 tap. Slowly and inexorably making its way to me. I heard the crackling of his joints, stirring again after who knows how long. I hid back in my corner. What else could I have done? I kept deathly still, waiting for the inevitable end. Tap, 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 tap. Closer and closer still. My eyes flooded with tears, and my breath came out in a whimper. I was going to die. I knew it. I could see the handle to the door start shaking. The clasp came undone, and it was slowly opening. It was my fate to die along with the others. Ruth, however, had a different idea. From across the room, there came a crash. It seemed like Ruth had broken one of the jars. The door stopped, and the footsteps started. She had saved me. I had to act fast. I crept out of the corner and over to the now open door. Slowly, silently, I slinked out and made my way for the exit. I had to feel my way out. There was still no light, and only the sound of the mummy's footsteps. I couldn't tell where Ruth was. I hoped against hope that this would be enough of an opportunity for the both of us. At last, I found the stairs. But how to alert Ruth? I felt around the ground for something, some loose stone I could throw, when my hand ran against something soft and rubbery. I froze. I was dead. I could hear the soft crackle of movement right next to me. One hand on my back, another on my head, then both beneath my arms lifting me. At the very least, my death would buy Ruth some time. I silently sobbed as the end came, as I heard a hiss emerge next to me.
Quiet!
Ruth hissed. I could hardly contain my elation that it was her. Salvation!
Be quiet, Robert. We have to get the door open.
All at once I remembered. The door kept everything sealed tight. We merely had to swipe a key card to get out. I fumbled for mine, grasping it in hand and groped around for the scanner. The mummy had stopped moving for the time being. I could almost see him watching us, feeling for our presence in the inky black tomb. Were we to become the contents of even more jars? I couldn't afford to think about that. I had to find that goddamn scanner and get us out of here. And at last, I had found it. I scanned my keycard, finally free. The door unlocked with a beep and a hiss, the door slowly opening. My heart sank. Tap, 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 tap. I nearly screamed. I pushed against the slowly sliding doors. Ruth joined me. We fought against the mechanism in desperate hopes of opening the door just a little faster. Tap, 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 tap. The mummy grew closer and closer. Tap, 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 tap. Finally, the door was open enough for me to slide through. Ruth, however, could not. Her hazmat suit was too bulky to fit through. I felt her push me through the opening. I screamed and reached for her. I clawed back. There was no way I was leaving her behind. But then, I felt her suddenly leave. She was torn back into the darkness by incontrovertible force. I reached and prodded desperately, trying to find any remaining sign of Ruth's presence. The doors continued opening, slowly letting more moonlight into the scene. And there I saw the mummy, holding Ruth, his eyes locked with mine. An ancient, mystifying terror beset me, like I was looking directly into the mouth of some slavering, ravenous beast. I saw his mouth torn into her neck. Her blood was oozing out from her wounds. Her head twisted impossibly backwards. The visor of her hazmat suit had been removed, and I could see her lip quivering and her eyes slowly rolling backwards into her head. Her body twitched and quaked like the leg of a dying spider, jerking and spasming while her blood spilled on the ground. I scarcely remember what happened next. My mind was not my own. All I can remember was howling and screaming into the night, tears streaming down my face. At some point, I must have made my way to town and got picked up by the police. Some of the more superstitious of the officers claimed I had been possessed by a djinn, but most of them merely accepted that I was having some sort of mental breakdown. I attempted to explain what happened to me, but the words simply wouldn't come out. Even if they did, I don't know that they would be so readily accepted. In time, I simply gave them a line about being attacked in the desert by bandits, that all my friends had died and we were due to return to the United States. They took some of my contact information and sent me on my way to the embassy in Baghdad, where I was taken home. I attempted to get back in touch with Dr. Emmerich. I had figured he'd want to know what happened on the expedition and in the tomb, but I was never able to reach him. His phone number was disconnected, and his email address merely bounced everything back. I even went so far as to contact his university, Mar Elias University of Arizona. I was met with a most chilling revelation. They had no idea who he was. I attempted to find my communiques with him, only to find they had all been removed while I was in Iraq. My mind folded inward on the revelation. The only conclusion that I could come to was that he somehow knew this would happen. That Lugal Magashanna would somehow rise from his crypt to taste blood once again. The only question I had left then was why go through all the effort just to feed him? What was the purpose behind this senseless slaughter? I fear I do not know, and I fear that this may only be the beginning of things to come.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Into the Night Anthology podcast. Narrated by Nari. Theme music by Nico Rodriguez. All other original music, sound design, and editing by Omenhawk Studios. You can find our links in the show notes. Into the Night is on your favorite podcatcher, so make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review to help other excursionists to join us. I'll see you next time. And remember, whether in the shadows or in the daylight, all twisted paths lead you into the night. Into the Night Anthology is a Creative Typo Entertainment production.